can open the floor. Yeah, Mullah is asking me just to emphasize a few things. What Dr. Saab has done is given a very comprehensive sort of discussion on the actual medical, physical, sexual, and psychological aspects to marriage, which is generally something that we shy away from, and I think it needs more detail and more sort of, and it can be done in smaller groups, but actually it's one of the fields that I specialize in urology, and we deal with men's sexual health issues. It places a big strain on marriages, and we see that very often. So I have many young men discussing the difficulties. So what Dr. Saab has explained is a very important aspect that often gets neglected in our marriage workshops. Inshallah, if people feel hard to discuss it in an open platform, we should create avenues where we can discuss it on an individual basis. So that's one thing. The other very important aspect that gets neglected in various of our discussions is the psychological aspect to marriage. Now, each one of us is a human being. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us very differently. And no two people are alike. Even in the same home, no two siblings are alike in terms of their psychological makeup, in terms of their personalities. And you can imagine when you bring two people together and they have to live the rest of their lives together, and they have very different personality types. And this brings about a lot of friction in marriages. So one of the very important things to understand from a very early on in a marriage is to understand that you are a unique person, and so is your spouse, when it comes to your personalities and it comes to your psychological makeup. So there's a whole list of different psychological traits that we all have. Some of us are more obsessive compulsive. Some of us are more anxious. Some of us have dependent personalities. Some of us have very extroverted personalities. Some of us have very introverted personalities. And sometimes these traits can be very ingrained traits, and they may border onto illnesses also. So these are important things we must understand. Firstly, understand ourselves, psychologically, who you are, what is your personality. Understand your spouse, what their personalities. Once you've understood, because personality traits cannot be changed. They're like fixed. It's like physical traits we have. You know, we have a certain shape of a nose that's not going to change. So when your spouse, when you get married, your spouse comes in with a certain personality trait. And the problem that happens is very often we try to change the trait to suit our trait. And this is where a lot of the frictions happen. And I think this is a very growing field. And I think more and more counselors understand this. But it's important as a newlywed couple or people in longer marriages understand that you cannot change somebody's trait. You can work around it and accept their trait. And sometimes, you know, it's a trait that is beyond the trait and becomes a disorder, and that needs treatment and that kind of thing. So that's also important. So two important things we learn is that there's physical traits, and Dr. Saab spoke about it, the physical traits with regards to our body image, with regards to our sexual performance, with regards to our spouses and ourselves. And secondly, the psychological traits. So there's lots to discuss in it. You know, Alhamdulillah, Darul Ihsan has embarked on a very good project, and I think these kind of projects must run, and hopefully we see more of these things, you know, in our communities. But I think it's something for us to think about, inshallah. So look, I'm offering my expertise here. So if anyone wants to discuss that aspect, I can shed some light on those kind of aspects, even on an individual basis. I know these are topics that are very hard to speak about in a group. But sometimes, you know, our deen, it teaches us amazing things. The Rasul of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was very open with his Sahaba. There's a hadith of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam that a woman came to Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she complained that her husband is impotent, that he has erectile dysfunction. And how did she describe to Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam? She folded the end of her jubbah, and she said, my husband is like this. That means he was not performing sexually. So this is the extent which our deen teaches us. It's obviously maybe our cultural sort of situation where we are unable to discuss some of these things very openly, and each one of us has a different personality. So we can either discuss this thing openly as an open question, or we can discuss it individually, inshallah. And so we're here, we've got about 15 minutes, I think, on. We can throw the floor open for any questions. Go for it. I'll start with the one question the brother asked about testosterone. So testosterone supplementation is a real problem in not so bad in our community, but other communities I see it in, and people are building muscle because they're playing certain sports and weightlifting and that sort of thing. So testosterone supplementation in a young adult is a problem. actually testosterone supplementation in older men becomes a medical therapy. So in a young adult should not be taking testosterone supplementation because it causes problems with testosterone production. So we all have our endogenous testosterone production. Once you take an external source of testosterone, then it affects fertility. Big problem we see in young men who've been doing gymming and they've been taking supplements in the gym and then they get married, they find that they're sterile. But in older men, it's sometimes there's a need to supplement them. It's not a problem in older men to take testosterone supplementation under the guidance of a professional. Any questions? I think it could be medical also.
What if your wife is into menopause, they end up with all hot flushes and stuff?
Okay.
What do you do? Do they stay clear as they can be? Or?
So in terms of, you're talking about sexual intimacy. Yeah. So, you know, menopause is a treatable condition. It's not like such that a woman should just be left with the menopause. So there are women who go on to supplementation at that time, and then they should be. And that again, with the guidance of your clinical practitioner, you know, sometimes some women go through a premature menopause state and they need estrogen supplementation. And so they need some sort of hormone supplementation. And there are therapies for it. So that avenue should be looked into. Overreacting. So as I was saying, that we all have psychological traits, and it's very important to understand that we all have different personalities. So some people's personalities lend them to have a short fuse, or loss of a better word, we have a short fuse, and particularly in men. And Allah has created us as men because men are meant to go out and earn the living. So Allah has created us with this potential to anger. And so men did generally have the shorter fuse, and some men more than others. And that's why I say the very important thing at the start of any marriage, and before that also, is to understand who you are. If you are known, you're a person with potential for anger at a very short, you have a very short fuse, you need to make sure that you work yourself up to getting married, making sure that that doesn't become a problem in your marriage. So what happens is men don't realize that. If you understand that you get angry for any small thing, it gets compounded when you get married because you're living in a space with another person and sharing, then that anger becomes compounded. So that affects a lot of marriages. So some men are known to have a shorter fuse. I mean, from the lives of Sahaba, we see that some Sahaba were very timid and some Sahaba had, this is how Allah has created us. But there's no excuse for acting out on that anger. So very well before marriage, that man needs to get his act sorted out because he knows that he's difficult. Some men have other problems. Some men have impotency problems. Some men have a problem with, the opposite. They are absolutely effeminate, for example. So all these type of problems need to be looked into. Very important. As much as we're looking at communication and that kind of thing, we need to look at our physical and psychological makeup before marriage also. Any other questions, Doctor?